So I'm here with Ron Ammons, who was a former retired coach at UF.
Head softball coach at University of Findlay, 2002 to 2015.
And do you have any other legacy besides that? You've been around campus for a while. So
I graduated here in 1981 with my undergrad, and then I went to Bowling Green to get a grad degree. And right now I'm the head baseball coach at Findlay High School. So that's my retirement job, is baseball.
So you're probably missing baseball right now.
Yeah, we are. We had a full run-up, a full preseason, went right up to 1 week before our first scrimmage, full go, and then had to tap the brakes hard. So we're missing baseball.
Well, this time last year, both of us were in France for the 75th anniversary of the Normandy invasion, otherwise known as D-Day. And so we brought you into the studio just to talk about those experiences, because we were at the same place at the same time but never saw each other,
right.
But kind of were at the same places. So tell us part of your story. Why did you want to go to the 75th anniversary?
Well, my father landed at Utah Beach, the famous beach. The famous beach is Omaha. That's what everybody knows from things like the Saving Private Ryan and the Longest Day movies. But Utah was a less contested beach, so to speak, that was east of Omaha. He landed there 2 days after the main invasion, landed on June 8th, 1944, and fought for 11 months to the day, to the end of the war. And many, many millions of Americans fought during World War II, and many hundreds of thousands in Europe. But so many of those men that came back did not really speak about their experiences because it was traumatic or personal, or they didn't want to scare their family or let their parents know what had really happened, which was the case in my dad's family. My dad spoke a little more about it than his brothers. He had 3 brothers that served. He spoke a little more about it. So I got interested because my dad was willing to share his story when I was younger. And I have a little picture here of his company, and this hung on the wall of our house when I was a kid. His company, Company C of the 357th Infantry Regiment of the 90th Division. And I would ask questions about the picture. And then I started to follow up on my own as I got older about what happened with certain gentlemen there, and made connections with some historians in France. Next thing I knew, I had a good enough connection. They said, come on over and visit, and we'll host you and we'll give you a guided tour. And am I rambling too much here?
No, not at all.
Okay. The great thing is, I think a lot of people go to a certain historical point and they say, well, I know my father was in this town. I know he was in this area. With these historians that met with me, and these are young guys. These are guys in their 20s and 30s. They said, your dad's company was not only in this town, your dad's company was in this tree line, and your dad's squad was in this hole. So I got some very specific directions over there, which made it really exciting to stand exactly where he had been.
So was this your first time in Normandy?
This was my second time, actually. I went in 2014 for the 70th anniversary. Loved it, and got so much good hospitality. And you know from being there that Americans are especially at those times, are venerated over there. And I felt special, even though I'm just a relative. But it was a festive time, and deliberation and whatnot, and to see a lot of our active American military were over there. It was just made me feel so good. And really, I'm patriotic anyway, but you know the feeling. Being over there at that time, your feeling of being an American just wells up inside of you. And I said, I've got to come back here for the 75th. Glad I did. You probably had the same experience I did, Andy. That may be the last time that some of those veterans go back. You know, you can see how many are dying each day. There are less than 300,000 American veterans remaining, and very few are able to travel. And I thought, this is great. It's the 75th. There will be 3 gentlemen from my dad's division that will be there.
Oh, wow.
So
still alive.
Still living.
Wow.
1 from each regiment. And so that was a special time to meet with them and to get and to feed from their experiences. The gentleman one of those three gentlemen, I traveled with him in the car, and he was pointing out things as we went. So not only did I have my historic, my tour guides, I had this veteran that was adding stories. I was just taking it all in.
Yeah, so you were there how long before the 6th? Did you get there?
I was there just a couple of days before the 6th. I was guided to come to specific towns. You know, each day it seemed like my dad's regiment, as well as many others, were liberating specific towns. So this was the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Peekaville. This was on the 6th. This on the 8th. This was the liberation of Turkaville on the 9th. This was the liberation of Hauteville on the 10th. So I was trying to go to these towns on the exact day of the liberation.
All right.
So I had a tight schedule.
Yeah. So when did you leave?
I can't remember exactly. I was there 2 weeks.
Okay.
So for those 2 weeks, every day it was something. It was 1 or 2 commemorations, different historic spots. We're running to get to places. I don't know if people realize how big of a region Normandy is. You realize how big it is. It's like the Midwestern United States. It's a big area, a lot of places to go, and there were still so many things on my list that I didn't get to.
Well, when you say running, that's hard to do prior to the 6th because the security was so bad. You couldn't get anywhere near anything, and if you did, there was a bunch of people there anyway. So it was up until the 6th. It was really hard getting around Normandy, and that's something I've never experienced. You know, usually you just drive around, go to different the cemetery, of course, and different towns, and you just drive in, and never an issue. But the police were just everywhere. And the day of the 6th was even harder. I left early in the morning, and I got a press pass, and I drove. I was in Hogat, which is on the east of the Pegasus Bridge, because I had to drive through there every day, twice a day, and it was a bunch of Brits were just partying there all day long. But
there were some parties.
Yeah, and so I get on the road on I think it was the 512, I think, I can't remember, and I get on it, and there's nobody on it, and this is like 7 o'clock in the morning, because they tell you got to be there 2 hours beforehand.
Right.
And I'm driving, and I'm not seeing a soul. There's not a car going behind me, in front of me, or going the other direction. I'm thinking now, all right, I've passed some kind of diversion that I didn't see. Like I got on there and I didn't see it, but I don't remember not seeing, because it's 7 o'clock in the morning. I'm not really awake. I'm driving. Next thing I see, 2 guys on motorcycles coming up behind me, and they're hauling, and they come up and pass right by me, and my heart was pounding. I'm like, I'm going to get in trouble. And I pulled off on the exit where I was supposed to get off, and that's when I ran into the security. And I just kept driving around and ended up on this road, and they're like, you can park here, a bus will pick you up. I'm like, okay.
I was fortunate. I had people that knew the area that were my tour guides. They knew how to get around things.
Right.
They had the right passes. So that's what I said. If you go over there blind, like my father went over there in 1969, 25 years after, and tried to go from memory from place to place, and he was somewhat able to do it, but things had even changed in 25 years. I wouldn't have known where to go. I would have been looking at a map.
But the roads weren't even paved.
The roads weren't even paved at that time, so that's the great thing about Normandy too. I think it looks a lot like it did 75 years ago. It's a bucolic, rustic area. I think some by design, and it's a lot of pastures and farms, and maybe you found this, AJ. The things that were new because they were bombed out during the war. Caen and Carentan and some of those towns are new towns. Well, they had to be new towns. They were absolute rubble. But to think that you see a Norman farm, and I would ask my friends, what year do you think that farm was built? They say, oh, it's probably 400 years old. I thought, wow. And people are still living in it like we live in a house now, no big deal. And for the next several generations, they'll continue to be in it. So, but as you said, your original point, the security was tight. Did you go to Omaha Beach for the 6th?
I did not go this time. I mean, I should rephrase that. So I went to Colville, Samara, where the cemetery is. Sure. But I had been to those beaches already, so I didn't want to go back and have to deal with the crowd. So I just, because I had a press pass, I just focused on that. Then I went to see the parachute jump out of Carentan, which was awesome.
Yeah.
And then But I had already been to the beaches, so and then I was with the press pass. I was able to go in the day before the 6th on the 5th, and they brought out veterans to be interviewed, and they brought them out, and I have some great photographs of that. And that was kind of overwhelming because they paraded them down, put them in front of the. They turned them so their backs were to the beaches. And then it's just a throng of photographers came at them, and I was like, oh boy. This is rough, I mean, this is like a horde. I felt bad for them, but they were super, cool about it. People, everybody was sticking their mics in their faces and taking photographs, and but that was probably the only day that I went to the beach. I'd been to the other beaches before,
Sure.
Like Point de Hoc is just amazing.
It's probably best to go to the beaches on a day when it's not a specific anniversary.
Yeah.
And you can move around better.
True.
But, you mentioned the veterans there, and they're treated like rock stars. I've told anybody that I know, and it's not that many people, if you have a father, uncle, grandfather that's a veteran that's still mobile at all, and as a European veteran, get them over there because they're treated like royalty. People think of the French being in a certain way, but that's a stereotype.
Yeah.
They were great. They treated our veterans like rock stars anywhere they went. They were being interviewed. People were getting their autographs. It was amazing. The funny one for me, when I was over there on the 70th in 2014, the one veteran that was with me, very humble guy, we're right together. We show our passes and we get into that. We went to the Omaha Beach ceremony. And he and I are together, and suddenly they call for veterans. And so he walks off with a military guy. And then President Obama flew in on a helicopter to deliver the address. So I was way back in the cemetery watching Obama on a screen. He looked like an ant.
Right.
I couldn't get any closer. President Obama looked like an ant up there. I'm kind of strolling around looking on the big screen. Then I look up and this veteran that had been with me is sitting right behind Obama, from me to you. And I'm like, okay, that's what being a veteran can get you. And
Yeah.
It's so funny to see him right there.
I had a similar experience when we were waiting for the buses, and we waited, I think, an hour and a half for the bus. I think the event started like at 10. It was supposed to start at 10, then it was 11, then it was at noon, it just kept pushing it back. But so we're waiting on the road, and the bus, they finally, the police come and say, gather up, we're going to put you on the bus. And then sure enough, a bus shows up, and then I'm the last one on my bus. So I sit in the front row right next to, it was a special officer, an envoy, who was with this guy who was wearing a hat that says a D-Day survivor. And so, I turn around, I start talking to him, and everybody's kind of talking, just being very friendly. And the guys across the aisle were Navajo code talker. They were ancestors, first generation. So they're bantering back and forth, and conversations going on, like, what happened to you? And say, well, I got shot 3 times in Normandy. I had a LST thing,
The ramp
fall on top of him.
That could have killed him.
And yeah, so we get off. This is the entire bus ride. We get off the bus. Now I'm like, I get off and I see a bunch of people, like 12,000 people trying to get in the cemetery, go through security. And I'm like, I asked the guy, where's the press? He's like, over there. I go, there's not a soul over there. I was like, awesome. Press pass came in handy. But so fast forward, President Trump is up there speaking, and he starts telling the story, the same story I just heard. And I'm like, that can't be. And sure enough, they show this guy. It's Ray Lambert on the big screen. The guy I was just sitting next to in the bus. I'm like, why was that guy in the bus in the first place? Somebody said special envoy, pick him up. Apparently they forgot about him, and but that was pretty wild.
I guess so.
It's quite a story. Then I saw the same story, similar in NPR. Then the Wall Street Journal picked it up. It was pretty amazing. And he was there with his doctor. His doctor was his escort.
Right.
But
it was interesting to see for me who was escorting certain veterans. There was a Comanche tribal elder who was there, who had been a medic on D-Day, and he had a whole contingent of people from his tribe in tribal dress, like 20, 25 people. You mentioned the code talker, and then I went to the Brittany American Cemetery in the region of Brittany, And it wasn't a special day. There were just people meandering about the cemetery, not a lot of people. But then a van pulled up, and some more people in full Indian regalia got out, and one of their tribal members had been killed in the Brittany area in 1944, and they were there in dress and had sacred items, and they were going to go perform a ceremony at his grave. And it's just amazing what you see. You're not fully prepared for what happens. You can't imagine what's going to happen or who you're going to see.
So some of the other experiences that I want to get your views on, the reenactors, because they were everywhere.
Everywhere.
And I thought was cool. It was like a throwback to the 40s. Right. It was weird without all the fighting, of course. But did you run into these guys quite a bit?
Oh my gosh.
Males, females, old, young.
Absolutely. Yeah, Reenactors is a whole chapter unto its own. The historians that I was with, the young men and some women, are reenactors. And the interesting thing is, when you go, especially if you go on a specific date, every June 6th, there are reenactors everywhere. And for the 70th anniversary, as you probably saw, and the 75th, they come out of the woodwork. And here you are with, you can't even describe how many of these GIs are walking around in realistic, and sometimes authentic gear, and hardly any of them are Americans.
Yeah.
They're all dressed mainly like paratroopers.
Yes.
Paratroopers are venerated there. So I ran into Poles, French, Spanish, Czechoslovakians. Hardly any speak English. Well, some can speak broken English. A couple of guys that I was with could.
But they're wearing American.
They're wearing American. They're GIs.
Yeah.
Some of them even have the face paint like the paratroopers did. But you say, "Hey, Mac," and they look at you like they don't speak English. And I had a great experience. Sometimes they'll go on maneuvers, and on a specific date, they'll go to a specific place. The guys that I was with, and I even dressed like a GI one day. I said I was the oldest GI in Normandy. I was 58 years old when I did this. And my friend said, we're going to just reenact when a group of paratroopers moved forward in this area, and one of my dad's regiment or another regiment covered them. So that's all it was. But he said, use some American lingo, if you would, just so these guys are around it. So as these guys dressed like American paratroopers were marching past us, I'd say, "Hey, Mac. Hey, buddy, how you doing?" And they kind of look at you like, they didn't speak English. And I had so much fun with that, just throwing out some American lingo. But
yeah.
I think they liked that.
Well, yeah, the other thing, outside of the fact that these guys were dressing up, and at the cemetery I think it was the 5th, they had reenactors there too, and they had females who were dressed up as well in WAC uniforms.
Sure.
But I went to Carentan to watch, and I couldn't get in, so I was in, I'm trying to think of the name of the town that I was in, but it was outside of Carentan. So I stopped at a pub because that was the furthest, everything was blocked off. So I'm sitting there, and here comes all these guys on bicycles from Britain, from Portsmouth, dressed up on bicycles, and they stop at the pub and just start ordering beers.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like 10 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. It's a cultural thing.
Yeah, it was pretty funny, but they were a trip, and I took a bunch of pictures of them, and they're all saluting, and then they're hooting and hollering when the parachutists jump out of the airplane, which is really cool. I mean,
my gosh.
And I was surprised at how many times they flew by.
Right.
Yeah.
I've seen parachutists at fairs and things like this, but for these, for these anniversaries, the 70th, the 75th, they just dropped stick after stick after stick of paratroopers, and you can really get the feel of what it was like, because they're coming down 22 at a time, 22 at a time. Here they come, falling and falling, and the sky's full of parachutes. And you probably know our paratroopers don't use the round parachutes anymore like they did in World War II, but many of these guys use the authentic round parachutes and were dressed like World War II guys. And you really got the feel. And the C-47s were a lot of times were the planes that were dropping them. And to see how slow those C-47s fly, 120 knots, it's no wonder so many of them were shot down.
Yeah.
They're just grinding. They almost look like they're going backwards, dropping these paratroopers. And
Yeah, I was
You can
thinking that because you can hear them coming, but you can't see them because they were
Yes.
so low. And you're looking around, you're looking at the horizon, and then they just throw like on top of you right
They're on
away. You're
top
like,
of you.
Yeah, amazing.
And that's one of the strategies they used to not get shot down. Stay low, drop these guys from between 1,000 and 3,000 feet, so you don't get your plane shot down. But boy, if your chute doesn't open and your reserve chute doesn't open, you've had it.
Yeah.
But to see that many paratroopers in the air was amazing. And I wanted to mention one other thing about the reenactors, AJ. The guys I was with, and many of them, I'd like to say most of them are stringent on what they wear, how they look. And if you are not authentic and you're doing things you shouldn't be doing that are inauthentic, most of the reenactors don't like that. They call them cowboys. We saw some guys down on Omaha Beach messing around and kind of aiming their replica guns at each other. And my buddy Vinny said those are cowboys. They shouldn't be doing that. They're not respecting the uniform. They want it to look right. And then the amount of vehicles that they have. I mean, you're even talking armored cars.
Yeah.
A few tanks.
Yep.
And the reason being, as you well know, a lot of this stuff was left there after the war. It's not like people flew their tanks over for the reenactment or maybe some of them might have been able to get a Jeep over there. But you've got vehicles on the road. And so you see the GIs, saw a few Sherman tanks, saw armored scout cars, motorcycles. I mean, there are vehicles. It's motorized as well. So
yeah.
You really, these old engines are grinding and you really get the feel of what it was like to be jammed with all these liberators.
To your point, that's exactly right. That it really made you feel like you were there in the moment, without the war going on.
It did,
but,
yes.
Driving down the road, I'd be on some lonesome road trying to get around Carentan, especially because I couldn't get around it. I'd go way out of my way to get around it, especially that day. But you'd be driving down the road and coming the other way, it'd be like a group of Jeeps, and everybody dressed up, and I'd stop my car and just start taking pictures, and it was really cool. That was probably the coolest thing. Everybody give you the high sign or the peace sign.
And in our car, we had a sign in the front window that said that we had a World War II veteran in the car. And number one, it gets you through checkpoints a lot quicker. And number two, everybody's waving at the car and waving. This guy's just waving and waving and waving because with the few number of World War II veterans that were actually able to get over there now, it really made something special. And with the reenactors, you hardly ever saw anybody dressed as a German soldier. And my friend Vinny told me, well, that's, for one thing, a lot of that stuff's for more or less illegal. It's illegal, the swastika. They don't want the German uniforms. So very seldom did you see anything German. They did do one reenactment where they had a couple prisoners. These guys were dressed as Germans, but they just, there's still a lot of resentment, whatnot. A lot of the stuff is illegal to own. And we even went to the town of Picaville. They had a commemoration of the liberation of this small town, Picaville, and there were a modern American military there. Some even from the 90th, it's now called the 90th Sustainment Brigade. My dad was in the 90th Division. This is the 90th Sustainment Brigade, and there were modern German military there. They're a NATO ally. They've been our ally for 70 years.
Right.
But I asked my friend, I said, what do the French think about having modern German military here? He says they understand, they're a NATO ally, but some of the older French still are a little leery about the Germans participating in these commemorations.
Sure. 2 world wars make you do that.
Exactly. Yeah, 2 world wars later, and and we have a different feeling about it than the French do. Even though we lost a lot of men over there also, we have a different feeling because nothing happened on our soil. So that you have to be very respectful.
The only place I saw German reenactors was at Bloody Gulch.
Bloody Gulch.
There was a reenactment, a campsite there.
Mm-hmm.
It was a church, and then across the field they had the church was part of that battle, and I forget it's in Band of Brothers. They call it something else, but they don't refer to it as Bloody Gulch.
Right. I can't tell you. I wish I could.
Yeah, I can't remember either, but that's the only place I saw. It was a German encampment, and they had some cars there, some Mercedes, some old Mercedes, which was pretty cool. And it was a farmhouse, I believe, and then, but that was it. The entire, time I've been there,
Right.
I've never ever seen a German anything there. Well, tell me about your father and some of his exploits, because there's not many veterans that come in Normandy and last to the very last day of VE Day. That's rare.
Yes, I have to. In some ways, my dad was unique. In other ways, very, very common. I'll just briefly show this picture again. I know you can't close up on it, but this is Company C. This was taken in February of 1944. They're in training at Fort Dix here. So here are 180 GIs. The company captain's right in the middle. He's a 28-year-old captain. So already, at this point in the war, we're getting into younger and younger guys. Many of these guys are teenagers. My dad was 19 when this was taken. So these 180 men are getting ready to go over on the Great Crusade, in Europe. So between February and June, they might have gained a few more. They might have gotten close to 200 men. And Dad's in the back row. You can't even see him. I say this is a perfect illustration of my dad being a face in the crowd. But once this group lands at Utah Beach on June 8th, and there were no bands playing. It wasn't like Stars and Stripes Forever. There was no action on the beach. The beach was secured. There was equipment laying around. As a matter of fact, before my dad even got off his transport, they're sitting out offshore waiting for their chance to go in. An American fighter plane that was damaged is sputtering out over the water. The pilot had already jumped out of it in parachute. They watched him jump in parachute, but the plane is sputtering on and is heading right for my dad's transport. And they're all looking at this going, this is not going to happen. This is not going to happen before we even get on the beach. And the plane, my dad said at the very last minute, the plane winged up and went in the water right beside their transport. So that was his introduction to what was ahead. But they get in the smaller landing craft and churn towards the shore and get on the beach. And the beach master, the guy that's in charge there, says, get moving, get out of here, get inland. The fighting's inland. So there's one break. Have you been on Utah Beach?
Yep. There's
one break in the sand. So they all head for that one V in the sand. They all go through there and head inland. So no casualties on the beach. I mean, the landing was 2 days before. And we only lost about 150 guys at Utah Beach. We landed there by accident, truthfully,
right.
and got inland quickly thanks to the quick thinking of General Teddy Roosevelt Jr., who was in charge of the 4th Infantry Division on the beach. And he took a quick surveillance and said, we're at the wrong place, but this is a good place to be. Let's get inland. And earned the Medal of Honor for that action, for his quick thinking. Dad moves inland, June 8th. They dig in, they hear the fighting going on, so they're in a foxhole. They haven't been in action yet. These young guys, they're huddled together, and they hear the battle going on. And Dad said the sound of a far-off battle is inexpressible. It's a clear, dark evening. You can even hear the voices of the Americans and Germans yelling at each other in St. Mary-Glise and the firing going on. The next day, Dad's company moves through the village. It's all shot up. We had captured it, and they move in for their first action. So
to the St. Mary-Glise.
Through St. Mary-Glise. The battle for St. Mary-Glise is now over too. So they're moving even farther inland. But then the action starts. They got shot up by a bunch of snipers before they even took an offensive action. They're on the sides of the road. They're losing men. I think they lost 4, 5, 6 men right off the bat, being ambushed. Their first attack occurred on June 11th, so they're preparing for their first offensive action. The artillery's called in. It falls short, and the first guy that's lost in an offensive action, my dad's first sergeant, was killed by American artillery. So it's a bad show already. They keep moving in. The hedgerow fences are everywhere. The Germans are well hidden. They got chopped up. So, I had one question on there that I said, you could ask me, Andy, how long was the Battle of Normandy? Well, it was so much more than the beach landings, as you know. The beach landings took a day or two. Then it was 3 months of fighting in the countryside.
Village by
against
village.
Village by village, farm by farm, hedgerow by hedgerow, losing so many men. And a statistic that I never knew, for every German soldier that we killed in Normandy, we lost 1.7 Americans. So they're killing us at about 2-to-1 rate for 3 months. We lost, I believe, 80,000 Allied killed in the Battle of Normandy before we even break out of there. So Dad lost probably a fifth of his company in Normandy alone. I looked at the date of death and whatnot for this particular company, and this is just one company of one regiment, of one division. There were 25 divisions that comprised the Third Army, so this is going on everywhere in Normandy. So by the time this company breaks out of Normandy in August, they've pretty much been replaced at least one time over, if not two.
Right.
A lot of these guys have
Because they were replacements, essentially, weren't they?
These guys are all original, but yeah, they went in as a support company.
Yeah.
They weren't a first
replacements.
wave, but they were a support company. But yeah, they were first line guys. But by the time this company reached the end of their service on May 8th, on VE Day in Czechoslovakia, so they go through France, they go into Germany, back out up to the Bulge, Belgium, Luxembourg, back into Germany. 11 months later, only 2 or 3 of these guys, hadn't been at least wounded once. And I'm still doing the research. My dad and one other gentleman who I met, his name's Lewis Moreland, he made the whole trip, was never wounded, but his feet were ruined. All the walking they walked, it was estimated they walked 1,200 miles in this 11-month stretch. And another funny story is, I hate to ramble here, but one of the guys said, they said we walked 1,200 miles. He said, hell, that's not right. We ran a lot of it.
Yeah.
We ran a lot of that
I read
time.
that.
But probably this company alone, at least a fifth were killed. Almost 100% were wounded at least once. Maybe 2 or 3 guys weren't wounded. Some of these guys were wounded twice. Many were wounded twice. A handful were wounded 3 times, and at least 2 or 3 were wounded 4 times. This little gentleman in the front, if I could point him out here, Lieutenant McKenzie. I'm sure the camera can't pick this up. Lieutenant McKenzie got wounded for the 4th time in Germany in the Saar. This was only in December. And he was being carried back on a stretcher, and my dad heard him say out loud, "They can take this war and stick it. I'm through. I'm never coming back up here." So what does he do? Lieutenant McKenzie is in the Army for 31 years, ends up becoming a lieutenant colonel, serves in World War II, Korea, Vietnam. He's a career Army guy after saying, "I've had it," So, and this is not uncommon. It's not uncommon to find people, especially my age, who can tell you, my dad fought with General Patton. My dad was with Patton in Patton's 7th Army in North Africa, Italy, Sicily.
Right.
My dad was with Patton in Europe in the 3rd Army. Hundreds of thousands of guys fought with Patton, but not that many came back and explicated what they had done, told what they had done, or even wanted to tell. And then they kind of kept it to themselves. So I'm fortunate my dad was a history teacher. He was willing to tell his story. He kind of used it in his history classes, but a lot of times he'd put a little spin on it. He'd make it kind of just he'd tell you the funnier stuff that happened.
Where was he a teacher?
He taught at Glenwood Middle School.
So
it was Glenwood Junior High back in the old days. But he would always put a spin on it that the kids could relate to. You can't talk about casualties so much and what happened. But I had a kid come up to a guy my age tell me about 5 years ago. He said, "I learned 2 things in your dad's history class. Number one, you never smoke a cigarette in a foxhole," and I can't remember what else he told me. I thought, wow, what a funny thing to hear, but that's what it was. It was practical knowledge in a battle zone. But
I think that's what piqued my interest.